5 centuries ago, a French physician and astrologer wrote down some visions that still surprise us today with their accuracy. The Great Fire of London in 1666, the French Revolution, the World Wars, the unification of Europe. All of this seems to have been predicted in the enigmatic quatrains of Michel de Nostredame. But did the medieval seer really see the future? Or are his texts a brilliant mystification in which each era finds its reflection? Today, we will reveal the secret prophecies about the fate of Europe, check the facts, and try to understand whether human beings can foresee the future. Get ready for a journey through 5 centuries of enigmas and coincidences. If you are interested in history, the mysteries of the past, and the enigmas of the future, subscribe to the channel and like this video. And now, a question for discussion in the comments. Do you think Nostradamus really had the gift of premonition, or are his prophecies the result of talented literary creation and subsequent interpretations? Share your opinion, argue your position, and let's debate this eternal controversy between faith in prophecies and scientific skepticism. I look forward to your comments. On December 14, 1503, in the small town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence in southern France, a child was born who was destined to become one of the most mysterious figures in human history. He was named Michel de Nostredame, but the world knows him by his Latinized name, Nostradamus. The family of the future prophet belonged to Jewish merchants who converted to Christianity to escape religious persecution. Michel's grandfather, Jean de Saint-Rémy, was a cultured man, a court physician and astrologer, and it was he who planted in his young grandson the first seeds of interest in the stars and secret knowledge. At that time, the boundary between science and mysticism was very blurred, and astrology was considered a respectable discipline that was studied in universities alongside medicine and mathematics. Michel received his education first in Avignon, where he studied humanities, and then entered the medical school at the University of Montpellier. It was one of the oldest and most prestigious medical centers in Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries. However, his studies were interrupted in the most tragic way. A plague epidemic spread throughout Provence. The young student was not frightened by the mortal danger and devoted himself to treating the infected. His methods were innovative for the time. Nostradamus insisted on hygiene, fresh air, and clean water, and used his own herbal formulas. The rose petal pills he gave to the sick really helped, although modern researchers still debate exactly which components had the healing effect. The year 1529 brought Michel his long-awaited doctorate. He returned to Montpellier, completed his training, and began practicing medicine. The fame of the healer who could stop the plague where other doctors gave up in helplessness spread throughout the south of France. Cities invited Nostradamus, promising him generous rewards, and he traveled from one epidemic hotspot to another, saving hundreds of lives. In Aix-en-Provence, his methods stopped the plague, and in Salon, he was declared a national hero. But the doctor's triumph turned into a personal tragedy. His own wife and 2 children died of the plague. This shock changed Michel forever, turning the successful doctor into a recluse who sought solace in mystical visions. After the tragedy, Nostradamus spent several years wandering around Italy, where, as he later wrote, he received the gift of prophecy. What exactly happened during those years is unknown. The astrologer himself claimed that the visions came to him at night, when he meditated next to a bowl of water by candlelight. This method, known as hydromancy, was practiced in ancient times and was considered a way of piercing the veil of time. Upon returning to France in the mid-1540s, he fought the plague again and defeated it once more. For the second time, Michel married the wealthy widow Anne Ponsard Jamel, with whom he had 6 children. Family life stabilized, his practice brought in income, but Nostradamus devoted more and more time not to medicine, but to the creation of astrological almanacs. The first almanac was published in 1550 and instantly became a bestseller. People in the Renaissance were eager to know the future, and Nostradamus offered specific predictions for each month. When to sow, when to harvest, what political events to expect. The almanacs were published annually, and with each passing year, the author's fame grew. The nobility eagerly read his predictions, and the people whispered about the wonderful seer. But Nostradamus's name really resonated after 1555, when a book was published that would survive the centuries and become one of the most mysterious texts in history. This book was titled Prophecies, and in it, Michel de Nostredame looked not 1 year ahead, but thousands of years to the end of the world, which he dated to the year 3797. But what led this respected physician and astrologer to undertake such a grandiose task? And to what extent will his visions of Europe's destiny, which only now, almost 500 years later, are we beginning to understand, prove accurate? On March 1, 1555, the first volume of the Prophecies of Michel Nostradamus was printed in Lyon. The book consisted of 4 centuries, sections each containing 100 quatrains, or 4-line poems. A total of 10 centuries were planned, and the complete edition was later published in 1558. Each quatrain was an encrypted prophecy, written in a mixture of Old French, Latin, Greek, and Provençal. The lines were deliberately confusing, full of anagrams, allusions to ancient mythology, and astrological terms. The author himself explained this intentional confusion in the book's prologue, addressed to his young son, César. Nostradamus wrote that he had long refrained from publishing his visions for fear of the wrath of the authorities and the Church. After all, his prophecies spoke of the collapse of kingdoms, religious changes, and catastrophes that the powerful of this world did not want to hear. Nostradamus's working method remains controversial. In the prologue, he claimed that he composed his prophecies thanks to divine inspiration and astronomical calculations. He also mentioned the study of ancient occult texts, in particular the works of the Neoplatonic philosopher Jamvlich from the 3rd–4th century, who described methods of divination. Hydromancy, the observation of water in a copper cup by torchlight, was already known to the priests of ancient Egypt. Nostradamus adapted this practice by spending his nights in his study, in the attic of his house in Salon, where he would fall into a trance and write down the images that came to his mind. His contemporaries recalled that the astrologer often worked until dawn, and that the next morning he looked exhausted, as if he had been through a serious illness. He himself described the process as an encounter with the divine spirit, which revealed images of the distant future to him. Astrological calculations played a fundamental role in Nostradamus's methodology. In the 16th century, astrology was a recognized science, and the arrangement of the planets was considered the key to understanding earthly events. Nostradamus meticulously calculated the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn, the passage of comets, and lunar and solar eclipses. Many quatrains contain direct references to astronomical configurations, allowing researchers to attempt to date the predictions. For example, quatrain 151 describes the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the early degrees of Aries, which was only observed in May 1702, just as the War of Spanish Succession began. These coincidences raise the question: could Nostradamus really calculate events hundreds of years in advance based on the movement of celestial bodies? The structure of the prophecies is not accidental. 10 centuries with 100 quatrains each is a symbolic number that dates back to Pythagorean numerology. 10 was considered the number of fullness and perfection, encompassing the entire universe. The quatrains are written in a form close to medieval prophetic texts, but using the poetic meter characteristic of French Renaissance poetry. The rhyme is often irregular and the syntax confusing, giving the impression that the text was dictated in a state of trance or divine inspiration. Nostradamus did not give direct dates, replacing them with astrological indications or veiled hints. The names of historical figures were hidden behind anagrams. Thus, Napoleon's name was supposedly encrypted as Paulon or Napoleon, and Hitler's as Hister. Nostradamus's second important work is Message to Henry II, written in 1558. It is an extensive prose exposition of prophecies addressed to the French king. In the message, Nostradamus describes future wars, invasions from the east and south, the triumph of the kings of the north, and the 7-year period of the triumvirate of the three powers, which will be both allies and rivals. Here, for the first time, the theme of Europe as the scene of great conflicts, in which the northern countries will play a decisive role, is clearly raised. Who are these kings of the north? At different times, researchers identified them with Sweden during the 30 Years' War, Russia during the time of Peter I and Catherine II, or the Anglo-Saxon powers of the 20th century. But most importantly, Nostradamus insisted that his prophecies extended into the 37th century, covering almost 2,500 years of history. Is it possible that a medieval astrologer could really see so far into the future? Or are his texts a brilliant literary hoax that, thanks to their vagueness, allow confirmation to be found for anything? To understand Nostradamus's quatrains, it is necessary to know not only the languages, but also the cultural code of the 16th century. Each quatrain is a complex puzzle in which astrology, ancient mythology, geography, history, and Christian symbolism are intertwined. Take, for example, quatrain 245. The sky weeps too much for the birth of the androgen. Human blood is spilled near the heavens. Due to death, a great people is created too late. Soon and late will come the expected help. What does this mean? Androgen is a hermaphroditic being from Greek mythology, but in medieval philosophy, it is a symbol of the union of opposites, of the harmony of the incompatible. Could this refer to the unification of Europe, where different peoples and cultures merge into a whole? Or is it a metaphor for the political union of enemy powers? Interpreters differ in their opinions, and this is the main feature of Nostradamus's texts. Their complexity allows one to find meaning for any era. Geographical names in the quatrains are often encoded or given through ancient place names. France is called Gaul, Italy, Hesperia, or Latium, Spain, Iberia. But especially interesting is the term Aquilon, which Nostradamus uses to refer to the northern lands. In Roman mythology, Aquilon is the god of the north wind, and in poetic tradition, it is a metaphor for any northern territory. In different quatrains, Aquilon refers to Russia, Scandinavia, or Great Britain. Quatrain 49 says, "Long, long before the great misfortune of Aquilon, beyond the sea and the land, a great effort, such as has never been seen before." 18th-century researchers saw this as a prediction of the Northern War between Russia and Sweden, which began in 1700 and lasted 21 years. Russia then proclaimed itself for the first time as a great northern power, regaining its access to the Baltic Sea. Temporal references in the quatrains are rarely direct. Nostradamus avoided specific dates, preferring astrological references or vague formulations such as "when Mars enters the constellation of Leo," or "in the year of the great number 7." The seventh year of which century? 1707? 1817? 1917? 2017? This uncertainty gives rise to interpretations, but also generates justified criticism. If the prediction is so vague that it can refer to any time, can it be called a prophecy? Defenders of Nostradamus's legacy object. Medieval seers deliberately obscured their texts to avoid accusations of heresy and witchcraft. The 16th-century Inquisition actively persecuted fortune-tellers, and only the utmost vagueness of the formulations could protect the author from the stake. The symbolism of animals and natural phenomena plays an important role in deciphering the quatrains. The lion usually represents England, the eagle the Habsburg Empire, or, later, Napoleon, the bear Russia, and the rooster France. Kites, eclipses, and earthquakes are interpreted as signs of great change. Quatrain 241 predicts, "The great star will shine for 7 days. The cloud will make 2 suns appear. The great mastiff will howl all night when the great pontiff changes countries." The comet, visible for 7 days. The double sun, possibly a parhelion, an optical phenomenon in the atmosphere. The mastiff, a symbol of loyalty, but also of England. And the pontiff, the Roman Pope. Can this be related to a specific event? Enthusiasts find correspondences in history. Critics point out the forced nature of such connections. Linguistic analysis of the texts shows that Nostradamus deliberately used vocabulary that was archaic even for his time, drawing on Old French and Provençal from the 14th and 15th centuries. This gave the texts an aura of antiquity and authority. The mixture of languages created additional levels of meaning. A Latin word could rhyme with a French word, forming a new meaning. The anagrams required the reader not only to know the languages, but also to be able to see the hidden messages. The name Chiron in the quatrains is deciphered as the anagram Henrik, King Henry. But which of the many Henrys in European history? The second, to whom the prophecies are dedicated, the fourth, the one from Navarre, or the future monarch in general? It is precisely this ambiguity that makes the quatrains an inexhaustible source of research and, at the same time, an object of skepticism. Can we speak of a single correct interpretation, or does each era find its own reflection in Nostradamus's texts? To understand why Nostradamus could think this way about the future of Europe, it is necessary to immerse oneself in the reality of the 16th century. It was a time of great upheaval, when the medieval order was collapsing and a new world was being born. Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation, which began in 1517, divided the Christian world. Europe became a battlefield for religious wars, where Catholics and Protestants destroyed each other with fanatical cruelty. France, Nostradamus's homeland, experienced a series of bloody conflicts between Catholics and Huguenots, which reached their peak on St. Bartholomew's Day in 1572, when thousands of Protestants were massacred in Paris in just a few days. Nostradamus died in 1566, but he had already seen the beginning of this slaughter and understood that religious division would lead to catastrophe. At the same time, Europe faced an external threat: the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople in 1453 and advanced inexorably westward. By the mid-16th century, they controlled the Balkans, threatened Hungary and Austria, and their fleet dominated the Mediterranean. Every summer, Turkish corsairs raided the coasts of Italy, Spain, and southern France, taking thousands of Christians into slavery. Nostradamus lived on the coast of Provence and knew this danger firsthand. His quatrains are filled with images of Punic conquerors, that is, Africans and Muslims invading Europe. Many quatrains describe naval battles, sieges of cities, and the ruin of Christian lands. For the astrologer's contemporaries, this was a very real prospect. It seemed that the Ottoman Empire was about to absorb all of Europe, just as the Arab caliphates had once conquered Spain. The third most important factor was the dynastic wars for hegemony on the continent. Two great powers, France and the Habsburg Empire, fought for dominance in Europe. The Italian Wars, which lasted from 1494 to 1559, turned Italy into a scene of bloody battles. Nostradamus lived through the end of this conflict, which ended with the Peace of Cateau Cambrésis in 1559. But he understood that this was only a temporary respite. The Habsburgs ruled Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, and part of Italy. Their domains surrounded France on all sides. The confrontation between these two superpowers determined European politics, and the astrologer clearly saw that the conflicts would continue in the future. His quatrains are full of references to the Gallic rooster and the German eagle, whose clashes would shake the continent. The scientific revolution of the 16th century also influenced Nostradamus's worldview. Nicolaus Copernicus published his work on the heliocentric system of the world in 1543, placing the sun, and not the earth, at the center of the universe. It was an intellectual bombshell, although his contemporaries were not yet aware of all the consequences. Geographical discoveries expanded the frontiers of the known world. America, discovered in 1492, the sea route to India around Africa, Magellan's first circumnavigation in 1519-1522. The world became enormous, and Europe went from being a closed Christian cosmos to being part of a global system. Nostradamus, as a cultured man of his time, understood these processes and reflected on how they would influence the destiny of European civilization. Socioeconomic changes completed the picture of transformation. The development of the printing press, invented by Johann Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, led to an information revolution. Ideas spread at an unprecedented speed, literacy increased, and public opinion was formed. The growth of cities and the development of trade and banking created a new social class, the bourgeoisie, which demanded political influence. Peasant revolts caused by social inequality shook Germany in 1524-1525. Nostradamus lived in a time when the old feudal order was crumbling and the new one had not yet formed. It is not surprising that his prophecies are full of images of chaos, wars, changes of dynasties, and religions. He extrapolated the trends of his time into the future, and his grim visions largely came true. The next 4 centuries of European history were indeed filled with conflict, revolution, and catastrophe. But could he foresee the specific forms these events would take? And where is the line between historical foresight and true prophetic gift? One of Nostradamus's most surprising predictions concerns the Great Fire of London, which took place in 1666, exactly 100 years after the prophet's death. Quatrain 251 reads, "The blood of the righteous will be demanded from London, burned by fire in the year 66. The second line is so precise that it inspires reverential fear. The event, the city, and the year are indicated almost in exact words. On September 2nd, 1666, a fire broke out in a bakery in Pudding Lane that destroyed much of medieval London in 4 days. 13,200 houses and 87 churches, including St. Paul's Cathedral, were burned down, and 70,000 of the city's 80,000 inhabitants were left homeless. The fire was so intense that stones cracked from the heat, and molten lead from the roofs flowed through the streets like rivers. Interpreters link the mention of the blood of the righteous to the religious persecutions that preceded the fire. In the 1660s, nonconformists, that is, Protestants who did not accept the Anglican Church, were persecuted in England. Thousands of people were imprisoned and some were executed. Contemporaries saw the fire as divine punishment for injustice. But how could Nostradamus have known about an event that would occur 111 years after he wrote the quatrain and 100 years after his own death? Skeptics point out that fires were common in medieval cities with wooden buildings, and that, sooner or later, London was bound to burn. Furthermore, the reference to the year 66 could be a coincidence. The quatrain could refer to the year 1566, 1666, or any other year with those numbers. However, the coincidence is so precise that it is impossible to ignore it completely. It is interesting that the number 66 appears repeatedly in Nostradamus's prophecies. In esoteric tradition, this number is associated with the diabolical 666, the number of the beast of the apocalypse. Nostradamus, being a Christian and a student of Kabbalah, was well aware of the numerological significance of these numbers. It is possible that he calculated from astrological tables an unfavorable year and predicted a catastrophe in a large European city. In the 16th century, London was already one of the largest cities in Europe, with a population of nearly 200,000. It was not difficult to imagine that such a metropolis would sooner or later suffer a fire. But choosing precisely this city and this year is more than just a simple calculation of probabilities. After the fire, London was rebuilt with stone and brick, with wider streets and open spaces to facilitate firefighting. The great architect Christopher Wren built the new St. Paul's Cathedral, which became the symbol of the reborn city. The catastrophe of 1666, paradoxically, marked the beginning of London's transformation into a modern European metropolis. Can Nostradamus's prophecy be considered not only as a prediction of a catastrophe, but as an indication of a moment of radical transformation? After all, in his quatrains, catastrophes often precede the birth of a new order. The destruction of the old world is necessary for a new one to emerge. That is the general philosophy of the prophecies. The accuracy of the prediction about the Great Fire of London made Nostradamus's quatrains incredibly popular in the 17th century. The book, which during the author's lifetime was known mainly in France, was translated into all European languages and became a bestseller. People feverishly searched the vague lines for hints of future events related to their countries and cities. An entire industry of interpreters emerged, publishing often completely contradictory explanations of the quatrains. But most importantly, Nostradamus was recognized as a true prophet. whose words come true with frightening accuracy. This recognition will endure for centuries, and each new era will find in his texts predictions of its own crises and triumphs. But was the Great Fire really proof of a supernatural gift, or simply the luckiest coincidence among a multitude of confusing predictions? The French Revolution of 1789 and the ensuing Reign of Terror is another historical event that, according to many researchers, was predicted by Nostradamus. Quartet 9-20 describes a scene eerily reminiscent of the storming of the Bastille. In the middle of the forest of Mayenne, there will be sun and lightning. The great prince born in Mans will enter the land of his ancestors that day. The forest of Meaux is traditionally identified with the Parisian neighborhood of Marais, where the Bastille Fortress prison was located. On July 14, 1789, rebellious Parisians stormed this symbolic fortress of absolutism. The event took place during a storm, sun and lightning, which was recorded in the chronicles. Interpreters relate the mention of the Great Prince to King Louis XVII, who was forced to recognize the revolutionary changes. Even more dramatic is the 917 Quartet. The Third Estate, like the first, the new sages will definitively eradicate the aristocracy, kill it, and expel it. The new sect of their books will eradicate it. The Third Estate was the name given in France to the common people, as opposed to the clergy, First Estate, and the nobility, Second Estate. In May 1789, the Estates General met, where the Third Estate demanded equal rights, and in June, the National Assembly was proclaimed. A revolution began that truly eradicated the aristocracy. The guillotine claimed the lives of the king, the queen, and thousands of nobles. The new sect, the Jacobins and other radical groups, established a regime of terror in which books from the past were burned, and churches were converted into temples of reason. The accuracy of the description of social change is astonishing, considering that the quatrain was written 234 years before the event. The execution of Louis XVI on January 21, 1793, was supposedly predicted in quatrain 157. After the death of the great pontiff, he will be replaced by another Roman pontiff. He will be reduced, but the throne will not remain empty for long, and the great burden he bore will be divided. Interpreters see here not only the execution of the king, great pontiff is a metaphor for the monarch, but also the subsequent instability of power in France. After the execution of the king, the country went through the Directory, the Consulate, Napoleon's Empire, the restoration of the Bourbons, the July Monarchy, the Second Republic, and the Second Empire. Power really did not remain long in the same hands. The great burden of royal power was divided among different bodies and individuals. The Jacobin Terror, which sent more than 40,000 people to the guillotine in 2 years, was reflected in the Quartet 88. The Great Red will become red, the family almost exterminated. The Reds will destroy the Reds. The Great Red and the Red Reds are chromatic symbols associated with blood and revolution. The Jacobins did indeed exterminate each other. Danton executed Hébert, Robespierre executed Danton, and then Robespierre himself fell victim to the Thermidorian coup. The family almost exterminated is possibly an allusion to the extermination of the royal family and numerous aristocratic families. Although, to be fair, it should be noted that this same quatrain was interpreted in the 19th century as a prediction of the religious wars in Spain, and in the 20th century as a prophecy about Stalinist repressions. This is the peculiarity of Nostradamus's texts. Their ambiguity allows them to be applied to different historical contexts. The philosophical meaning of the French Revolution as the end of the old world and the birth of a new one corresponds exactly to Nostradamus's eschatological conception. He wrote about the change of eras, when kingdoms, sects, and religions will undergo enormous changes and become diametrically opposed to the current ones. The revolution truly disrupted the millennial order, destroying the monarchy, limiting the power of the church, and proclaiming human and civil rights. If in the 16th century the idea of popular sovereignty seemed unthinkable, after 1789 it became a reality. Did Nostradamus see the specific details of the revolution? Or did he grasp the general trend toward social upheaval that would sooner or later bring down absolutist regimes? This question remains unanswered, but the connection between his quatrains and the events of revolutionary France seems convincing to millions of readers around the world. The appearance of Napoleon Bonaparte on the European scene is an event that scholars of Nostradamus consider one of the most convincing proofs of the astrologer's prophetic gift. Quatrain 61 says, "The emperor will be born near Italy, which will cost the empire dearly. They will say with what people he is related, they will find him less a prince than a butcher." Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769, in Corsica, an island that is geographically closer to Italy than to mainland France, and which until 1768 belonged to Italy. In fact, he became emperor by proclaiming himself as such in 1804. His campaigns of conquest cost Europe millions of lives. It will cost the empire dearly. The last line is particularly prophetic. His contemporaries called Napoleon the Corsican butcher and the Corsican cannibal, because of the dozens of bloody battles in which tens of thousands of soldiers died. The conqueror's name is possibly encrypted in the 8-1 quatrain. Pau, now, Laurent, there will be more fire than blood. They will swim in praise. The Great One runs to the place of confluence. He will deny entry to the pikes. Pompon and Durance will keep them closed. The first line contains 3 cities in the south of France, but when read together, we get Napoleon. The 19th century French researcher Anatole Lepelletier was the first to point out this anagram. The mention of the Pompon and Durance rivers is related to Napoleon's campaign in Provence. But critics rightly point out that an anagram can be constructed from almost any set of syllables if one tries hard enough. Moreover, the Corsican's real name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and he himself changed the spelling to the French style only after coming to power. Napoleon's military triumphs and defeats are described in several quatrains. Quatrain 26 mentions the great swarm of bees that will rise, but no one will know where they came from. The bee was Napoleon's personal symbol, adorning his imperial banners and cloak. He revived this ancient symbol of the Frankish kings of the Merovingian dynasty, emphasizing the link with France's legendary past. The swarm of bees is a metaphor for the Grande Armée, which conquered almost all of Europe with incredible speed. Indeed, Napoleon appeared out of nowhere, an unknown Corsican officer who in 15 years became the ruler of the continent. The Russian campaign of 1812 and the defeat of the Grande Armée in the snows of Russia were supposedly predicted in Quatrain 198. He whose face is splattered with the blood of the newly sacrificed, Jupiter in Sagittarius, Jupiter ascendant, France will come to an end. Sagittarius is the astrological sign that governs distant travels and foreign lands. In June 1812, Jupiter was indeed in Sagittarius when Napoleon invaded Russia. The campaign ended in catastrophe. Of the 600,000 soldiers, less than 30,000 returned. The Russian frosts, the partisans, the burning of Moscow, the retreat. It was the end of Napoleon's invincible empire. The Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, finally ended the emperor's reign, and he was exiled to the island of St. Helena, where he died on May 6, 1821. The mention of the Northern Empire in the context of Napoleon's fall takes on special significance. Russia, which stopped the French conqueror, established itself as a great power that determined the fate of Europe. The Congress of Vienna of 1814 to 1815 consolidated a new balance of power, in which the Russian Empire played a key role. Nostradamus repeatedly mentions in his quatrains the confrontation between the powers of the South and the North, in which the North ultimately prevails. If we interpret Russia as the main Northern Empire, the predictions about its rise in the 19th century seem very accurate. But the question arises again: did the prophet see specific events, or did he describe a general trend whereby the center of power in Europe was shifting from south to north? History has shown that, after the Napoleonic era, it was precisely the northern countries, Russia, Prussia, later unified Germany, and the British Empire, that determined the continent's politics. 20th century Europe became the scene of two world wars, each of which claimed millions of lives and redrew the map of the continent. Researchers of Nostradamus find hints of these catastrophes in his quatrains, although interpretations are hotly debated. Quatrain 224 paints a terrifying picture. The beasts, maddened by hunger, will cross the rivers. Most of the camp will oppose Gister. In an iron cage, the Great One will be dragged away when the child of Germany respects nothing. 20th century interpreters interpreted the word hyster as an anagram of the name Hitler. In fact, the Latin name for the lower course of the Danube sounds like hyster, but the similarity to the name of the German dictator seems sinister. The child of Germany, who respects nothing, is an accurate description of Adolf Hitler, who violated all international treaties and unleashed World War II. World War I, which began in 1914, may be reflected in Quatrain 990. The captain of Great Germany will lend feigned aid to the King of Kings in support of Pannonia. His rebellion will cause great bloodshed. Pannonia is the ancient name for the territories of present-day Hungary and Austria. Austria-Hungary was indeed the trigger for World War I. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, set off a chain reaction. Germany supported Austria-Hungary, leading to a war in which more than 17 million people died. Great bloodshed is a euphemism for unprecedented slaughter, in which tanks, chemical weapons, and aviation were used for the first time. World War II left an even deeper mark on history. The Quartet 357 predicts, 7 times you will see the people of Great Britain change, stained with blood for 290 years. France will not be Germany's support at all. Aries doubts its Bastarnian pole. Counting 290 years from the publication of the Prophecies in 1555, we arrive at the year 1845. If we add another 100 years of political turmoil, we arrive at the middle of the 20th century, the era of world wars. France will not be the support of Germany. An accurate description of the confrontation in both wars. Bastarnia is the ancient name for the lands between the Danube and the Dniester, and Pole may refer to Poland, which was the first victim of Nazi aggression on September 1, 1939. The Holocaust, the extermination of 6 million Jews by the Nazis, is seen by some interpreters in the quartet 67. The sky will burn at 45 degrees. The fire will approach the great new city. Immediately a huge scattered flame will leap up when they want to test the Normans. The 45 degrees of north latitude cross France, Italy, and the countries of the Balkan Peninsula, territories where Nazi terror was unleashed. The scattered flame is a metaphor for destruction, and the Normans are possibly the peoples of the north, the Germans. Although it must be acknowledged that this same quartet is often associated with the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, which demonstrates the typical ambiguity of Nostradamus's texts. The liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944, and the end of the war in Europe on May 9, 1945, brought an end to the bloodiest conflict in human history. More than 60 million dead, cities destroyed, borders shifted, millions of refugees. Europe lay in ruins. But from those ashes arose a new order, the creation of the United Nations, the beginning of the process of European integration, a bipolar world with the confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. The 20th century confirmed Nostradamus's darkest prophecies about wars that would shake the continent to its foundations. But did he accurately predict these conflicts? Or are his quatrains so universal that they can be applied to any war? One fact is indisputable. Europe truly underwent catastrophic trials, the magnitude of which exceeded the worst nightmares of the medieval seer. The term aquilon, which Nostradamus uses in dozens of quatrains, deserves separate analysis. In Roman mythology, Aquilon is the god of the cold and furious north wind. Latin poets use this word as a synonym for the north in general. For medieval Frenchmen, the north was associated with barbarism, cold, and danger. But Nostradamus gives Aquilon a special meaning. In his texts, the force of the north always prevails over that of the south. Quatrain 54 says, "From the Black Sea and the great Tartaria, the king who will come to see Gaul will cross Alania and Armenia and leave a bloody staff in Byzantium." This is a classic example of an invasion from the north. The forces of the Black Sea, Russia, intervene in the affairs of Europe and the Middle East. History has confirmed this pattern. After the Congress of Vienna in 1815, Russia became the policeman of Europe, quelling the revolutions of 1848-1849. The Russian army saved the Austrian Empire from ruin by crushing the Hungarian uprising. In the Crimean War of 1853-1856, the European powers united to stop Russian expansion to the south. The Balkan Wars of the second half of the 19th century were fought under the patronage of Russia, which liberated the Slavic peoples from the Ottoman yoke. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877-1878 ended with the triumph of the Northern Empire and the creation of independent Bulgaria, Serbia, and Romania. The north wind truly left a bloody staff in Byzantium, on the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. The 20th century reinforced the role of the northern powers. The Soviet Union, which emerged after the 1917 revolution, became a superpower that determined the fate of half of Europe. The Cold War divided the continent into East and West, and the Eastern Bloc was controlled precisely from Moscow, the capital of the North. The fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, and the disintegration of the USSR in 1991 seemed to end the era of Aquilon. But Nostradamus's quatrains speak of the cyclical return of the power of the North. Quatrain 291 predicts, "When the sun rises, they will see a great fire, noise, and light spreading towards Aquilon. Within the circle death and screams are heard. Through iron, fire, hunger, death awaits them. The geopolitical events of the early 21st century have once again placed Russia as a key player on the European stage. Europe's energy dependence on Russian gas, conflicts in the post-Soviet space, rivalry for influence in Eastern Europe. All this confirms the predictions about the importance of Aquilon. But this term does not only refer to Russia. The Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, have played an important role in European history. In the 17th century, Sweden was a great power that controlled the Baltic. Gustavus Adolphus, in the 30 Years' War between 1618 and 1648, came close to changing the religious map of Germany. Norway and Denmark possessed vast territories, including Iceland, Greenland, and part of North America. Today's Scandinavia is a prosperous, stable region with a high standard of living. Scandinavian countries lead the rankings for happiness, education, and social protection. This is also a triumph for Aquilon, but no longer military, but cultural and economic. Nostradamus wrote that the kings of the north would eventually establish a new order in Europe. If we understand this not literally as a military conquest, but metaphorically as the spread of the Nordic social model, the prophecy takes on a new meaning. The welfare state, democracy, human rights, ideas that have materialized to the fullest precisely in the countries of Northern Europe. Is this the fulfillment of the ancient prophecies about the triumph of Aquilon? Or are we again seeing what we want to see, adjusting reality to vague lines written 500 years ago? One of the most intriguing themes in Nostradamus' prophecies is the prediction of the great union of the European peoples. In his message to King Henry II, the astrologer writes about the moment when the Christian church will be persecuted more than ever in Africa, and this will last until the year 1792, which will be considered the rebirth of the era. The year 1792 was the height of the French Revolution, when the church was indeed persecuted, monasteries were closed, and priests were guillotined. But Nostradamus calls it the renewal of the century, the beginning of a new era. After the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, Europe truly entered a period in which the idea of continental unity took practical shape for the first time. The Holy Alliance, created in 1815 by Russia, Austria, and Prussia, was the first attempt to create a system of collective security. Although the alliance was conservative, even reactionary in nature, it ensured relative peace in Europe for several decades. The concert of European powers, the principle whereby the great powers jointly resolved continental problems, remained in place until World War I. The quartet 6-21 describes it as follows: "When those united by Aquilona in the east, there is great fear and trembling. A new one is chosen, supported by a great tremor. Rhodes, Byzantium are stained with barbarian blood." The union of the northern powers, Russia, Prussia, Austria, against the common threat from the east, the Ottoman Empire, is an accurate description of 19th century geopolitics. The 20th century brought with it a new understanding of European unity. After the catastrophe of 2 world wars, it became clear that only unity could prevent new conflicts. The idea of a United States of Europe, proclaimed by thinkers as early as the 19th century, began to become a reality. On May 9, 1950, French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman made a statement on the creation of the European coal and steel community. It was a revolution. France and Germany, mortal enemies until then, decided to unite control of key sectors that had previously served to prepare for war. 6 countries, France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg signed the treaty in 1951. The Treaty of Rome of March 25, 1957, created the European Economic Community, the precursor to the current European Union. It was truly the Great Union that Nostradamus could have written about. Quartet 549 says, "Roman leader, be careful when approaching the city watered by two streams. There you will shed your blood, you and your people, when the rose blooms." Rome, where the treaty was signed, is a city located on the banks of the Tiber. Two streams, possibly two branches of the river, and the rose is a traditional symbol of renewal and peace. The warning, "Beware of your blood," can be interpreted as the need to act cautiously in the unification process so as not to rekindle old conflicts. The Maastricht Treaty of February 7, 1992, officially created the European Union. 12 countries joined together in a political and economic union with a single currency, a common foreign policy, and open borders. By 2025, the EU had expanded to 27 member states, with a population of about 450 million people. This is the largest peaceful unification project in history, realizing the dream of a united Europe without wars. The Quartet, 40 states. The great army that will be expelled will, at some point, be necessary for the king. The faith promised from afar will be broken. They will see it in a sorry state. Could this refer to the crises of European integration, from the Greek debt crisis to the UK's Brexit in 2020? The European Union is going through difficult times. The migration crisis, economic inequality between North and South, rising Euroscepticism, the departure of the United Kingdom. All of this poses a challenge to the project. Nostradamus warned that the Great Union would be fragile and face crises. But he also predicted that, despite the difficulties, European unity would be maintained in one form or another and become the basis of a new world order. The current European Union, with all its problems, remains a unique experiment in supranational governance, in which sovereign states voluntarily share power for the common good. Did Nostradamus foresee this when he looked into a copper cup of water 500 years ago? Or are his vague references to the Great Union so imprecise that they can be applied to any political alliance? Contemporary Europe is a continent of paradoxes, where old national identities coexist with supranational institutions, where the memory of world wars is combined with a period of 75 years of peace between the great powers. In 2025, the European Union brings together 27 states with a combined GDP of around $18 trillion, making it one of the world's largest economies. The single market, with free movement of goods, services, capital, and people, realizes an idea that would have seemed fantastic in Nostradamus's 16th century. Could the medieval seer have imagined a Europe without border posts, where a German works freely in Italy, a Frenchman studies in Poland, and a Spaniard retires in Portugal? The Schengen area, created in 1995 and expanded to 27 countries, has eliminated internal borders. This is an unprecedented experiment in human history. Sovereign states have voluntarily relinquished control of their borders, relying on a common security system. The Quartet 393 states, in Avignon, the head of the whole empire will stop due to the depopulation of Paris. Tripoli will maintain African terror. The Lamb will lead 300 rivers and 1,000. Avignon is a city in southern France, where the papal residence was located in the 14th century. Could this mean the transfer of the center of European power, or an indication of decentralization, where decisions are made in different cities across Europe, and not just in national capitals. Brussels, Strasbourg, and Luxembourg are cities where EU institutions are concentrated. The 2015 migration crisis, when more than 1 million refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and Africa arrived in Europe, was a severe test of unity. The mention of the African horror in the quartet takes on a disturbing relevance. For Nostradamus, who lived at the time of the pirate raids by Barbary corsairs, the threat from the south was very real. Today's migration is not a military invasion, but a cultural and demographic challenge that divides European society. Eastern European countries refuse to take in migrants, while Germany and Sweden have welcomed hundreds of thousands, leading to the rise of right-wing populist parties. Can the European Union maintain its unity in the face of this crisis? Economic disparities between Northern and Southern Europe are creating tensions. Germany, the Netherlands, and the Scandinavian countries are prosperous economies with budget surpluses. Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal are countries with high debt and unemployment, especially among young people. The Greek debt crisis in 2010-2015 nearly led to the country's exit from the Eurozone and the collapse of the single currency. The European Central Bank and the Commission imposed a harsh austerity program on Athens, sparking social protests and accusations of economic dictatorship. Quartet 542 predicts Geneva and Langres, through those of Chartres and Dole, and through Grenoble, captive of Montélimar, Seyssel, Lausanne, alienated by deception, will betray them for 60 gold marks. Could this refer to financial speculation and economic pressure in today's Europe? Brexit, the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union on January 31, 2020, has become a symbol of the crisis of the European project. The referendum on June 23, 2016, revealed a deep division, 52% in favor of leaving and 48% against. Great Britain, which never fully integrated into the EU, retained the pound sterling and a special status, preferring national sovereignty to European integration. This is the first time a country has voluntarily left the Union. Quartet 370 says, Britain, including England, will be flooded by very high waters. The new League of Austria will go to war, so alliances will be formed against them. Flooding by water is a metaphor for crisis. New League is possibly the reconfiguration of European alliances after Brexit. Despite all the crises, the European Union remains the most successful peaceful integration project in history. 75 years without war between France and Germany, which were enemies for centuries, is an achievement that seemed impossible after 1945. The common values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law unite different nations. Nostradamus wrote about the great peace that would come after a time of wars and upheavals. Is it possible that the current European Union, with all its flaws, is the fulfillment of this ancient prophecy? Or are we only at the beginning of that process, the end of which the seer saw in his hazy visions 500 years ago? The issue of armed conflict in 21st century Europe has taken on new relevance following the events of 2014 and 2022. The conflict in Eastern Europe has brought to mind Nostradamus's prophecies about the confrontation between the Eastern and Western powers. Quartet 289 warns, one day, two great masters will become friends. Their great power will be increased. The new earth will be at its peak. The number will be revealed to the red. Interpreters in recent years see this as a reference to the changing alliances in Europe and the role of the Eastern powers. The red is traditionally associated with Russia, and the New Earth may mean the new states that emerged after the disintegration of the USSR in 1991. The events in Ukraine, which began in 2014 and escalated in 2022, became the largest military conflict in Europe since 1945. NATO's eastward expansion after the end of the Cold War changed the balance of power on the continent. The Baltic states, Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria joined the alliance in 1999 and 2004. This movement of the Western military bloc toward Russia's borders created a new geopolitical reality. The 5-4 Quartet says, "The big dog, the greatest of the cities, will ruin. A fierce raid on foreigners, the spoils taken from the sea and the land. Those of Byzantium will change their laws." The big dog may symbolize a great power, and Byzantium is the traditional name for the eastern lands. The change in laws may refer to a change in the political system of the post-Soviet states. Europe's energy dependence on Russian gas has become an instrument of geopolitical influence. The Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines connect Russia and Germany directly, bypassing traditional transit countries. The gas supply crises in the winters of 2006 and 2009 highlighted Europe's vulnerability. The sanctions imposed after 2014 and the subsequent events of 2022 dramatically changed the EU's energy policy. The Quartet 45 predicts, "The government remains in the hands of two, who will not last long. In 3 years and 7 months, they will go to war. 2 Vestals will rebel. The victor will be born on American soil. 2 governments, a brief period of peace, and then war." Can we see here the cyclical nature of European conflicts? Cyber wars, hybrid conflicts, information operations, new forms of confrontation in the 21st century. Interference in elections through social media, hacker attacks on critical infrastructure, and disinformation campaigns have changed the nature of conflict. Nostradamus could not have known anything about computers or the internet, but his references to invisible war and words that kill more than swords now take on new meaning. Quartet 64 states, "They believe they can reduce hunger, untamed anger. At night the wolf will attack the cities. These two will be in such an unequal struggle that the memory of both will endure." Is the wolf at night a metaphor for hidden aggression, for the invisible war being waged in the information space? The question of the future of European security remains open. Can the European Union create its own army and become an independent actor from the United States? The idea of a European armed force has been debated since the 1990s, but its implementation is extremely slow. France and Germany advocate for Europe's strategic autonomy, while Eastern European countries rely on U.S. security guarantees through NATO. Nostradamus wrote about a time when old alliances will disintegrate and new ones will be formed based on different principles. Are we now experiencing precisely this period of reformatting the European security system? And what will be the outcome of this process that the seer tried to glimpse across the centuries? Scientific skepticism toward Nostradamus's prophecies has a long history and well-founded reasons. Critics point to several fundamental problems that cast doubt on the authenticity of the predictions. The first problem is retrospective interpretation. All the prophecies that have supposedly come true were recognized only after the events had already occurred. Before the Great Fire of London, no one interpreted quatrain 2-51 as a prediction of this event. Before the French Revolution, no one saw any reference to the fall of the monarchy in the texts. This is a classic example of how facts are adapted to theory. From among thousands of ambiguous quatrains, it is always possible to choose a few that, in hindsight, fit with the events that have occurred. The second problem is the extreme vagueness of the formulations. Nostradamus deliberately wrote in such a way that his texts could be interpreted in different ways. The use of anagrams, ancient place names, astrological terms, and multi-purpose metaphors creates an infinite field for interpretations. The same quatrain is attributed by different researchers to completely different events, separated by centuries. If a prediction is so vague that it can be applied to anything, its scientific value is nil. The mathematician and skeptic Martin Gardner, in his 1952 book, Whims and Errors in the Name of Science, demonstrated how easy it is to adapt Nostradamus's quatrains to any historical event by simply choosing convenient interpretations of the metaphors. The third problem is the absence of predictions made before the event. If at least one Nostradamus researcher had published the interpretation of a quatrain before the event occurred, which then actually happened as predicted, that would have been convincing evidence. But that never happened. All interpretations appear after the fact, when it is already possible to select the appropriate lines and declare them prophecies. Skeptics point out that Nostradamus did not predict any truly unexpected events, such as the discovery of America, the invention of electricity, or the creation of the Internet. All of his prophecies refer to wars, revolutions, natural disasters, events that have always occurred and are not difficult to extrapolate into the future. The fourth problem is the distortions and falsifications of the texts. The prophecies were published hundreds of times, and each edition contained errors, corrections, and sometimes outright falsifications. In the 17th and 18th centuries, numerous apocryphal texts appeared, attributed to Nostradamus, but actually written much later. The famous Letter to Henry II, King of France, published in many editions, contains fragments added after the author's death. Modern publishers freely edit translations, adapting them to the desired interpretation. In a 1999 study, French historian Roger Prévost showed how the texts of the quatrains change in different editions, sometimes to the point of being unrecognizable. The fifth problem is psychological. People tend to find patterns even where there are none, a phenomenon called apophenia. The human brain seeks meaning in chaos, sees faces in clouds, recognizes images in random spots. Nostradamus's confusing texts are ideal material for projecting one's own fears and expectations. In times of unrest, people seek explanations for what is happening and find them in ancient prophecies. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, Nostradamus's predictions about the fall of the Twin Towers spread across the internet, which turned out to be a modern forgery. But millions of people believed them because they wanted to make sense of the tragedy. Despite all the criticism, the Nostradamus phenomenon persists. Each new generation finds meanings in his texts that are relevant to their time. This says less about the prophetic gift of the medieval astrologer than about the immutability of human nature. Wars, revolutions, natural disasters, changes in power. All of this happened in the 16th century and continues to happen today. Nostradamus masterfully described the universal patterns of human history, clothed them in enigmatic poetic form, and left his descendants with an endless puzzle. People will continue to decipher this puzzle for centuries, finding in it a reflection of their own times. But whether it is a true prophecy or a brilliant literary hoax is a question that everyone must answer for themselves. The psychology of belief in predictions is rooted in the deep needs of the human psyche. Uncertainty about the future causes anxiety, and people have always sought ways to reduce this anxiety by obtaining at least some information about what is to come. Prophecies give the illusion of control. If you know what is going to happen, you can prepare yourself, or at least psychologically accept the inevitable. This explains why in times of crisis, wars, epidemics, economic crises, interest in fortune tellers increases dramatically. During World War II, millions of copies of Nostradamus's texts were published in Germany, France, and Great Britain. Each side sought confirmation of its victory in them. Goebbels's propaganda ministry even commissioned special interpretations that proved the inevitability of the Third Reich's triumph. The cognitive distortion known as the confirmation bias causes people to pay attention to information that confirms their beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. If a person believes in Nostradamus's prophetic gift, they will remember a few quatrains that have supposedly come true and forget the hundreds of others that have nothing to do with actual events. Psychologists call this selective perception. The brain filters information to maintain its image of the world. Experiments show that people tend to interpret even random coincidences as regularity if this fits their expectations. The Barnum-Forer phenomenon explains why vague predictions seem accurate. Psychologist Bertram Forer conducted an experiment in 1948. He provided students with supposed individual psychological characteristics, which were actually the same for everyone, and consisted of general phrases from horoscopes. The students rated the accuracy of the descriptions with an average of 4 and 2 points out of 5. It turned out that statements such as, "You need the approval of others," or "You sometimes doubt the correctness of your decisions," are applicable to most people. Nostradamus's prophecies work in a similar way. There will be a great war. Power will change. The people will rise up. These statements are true for any historical period, but the reader finds in them a description of their own era. The need to find meaning in things is especially strong when we are faced with chaos and tragedy. When a catastrophe occurs, an attack, an epidemic, a war, people cannot accept the idea that it is a coincidence or the result of a complex combination of circumstances. It is much more comforting to believe that everything is predetermined, that a wise seer foresaw the events. This gives a sense of order in the universe, even if it is tragic. After the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, Nostradamus's predictions about a global plague spread across the internet, even though there is no specific reference to the events of 2020 in the quatrains. But people needed to believe that even such a horror had been predicted by someone. The social function of prophecies is no less important. Debating predictions creates community. People share interpretations, discuss, and form groups of like-minded individuals. In the Internet age, thousands of forums and communities dedicated to Nostradamus have sprung up. This is the social dimension of faith. Being part of the community of wise men, those who understand hidden meanings inaccessible to ordinary people. Psychologists call this epistemic superiority, the feeling of possessing secret knowledge. This increases self-esteem and gives a sense of control in an unpredictable world. The paradox lies in the fact that critical thinking and belief in prophecies can coexist in the same person. Educated and intelligent people sincerely believe in Nostradamus without seeing any contradiction with their scientific view of the world. Psychologists explain this as cognitive dissonance and compartmentalization, that is, the ability to separate different areas of thought. In professional life, a person is guided by logic and facts, while in the spiritual realm, they admit irrational beliefs. It is a normal feature of the human psyche that allows us to function in a complex world where not all questions have rational answers. Nostradamus and his prophecies fill precisely this niche, the realm of the unknown and unknowable, where science is powerless and human imagination is limitless. Nostradamus' legacy in the 21st century remains surprisingly alive despite the skepticism of science and the criticism of rationalists. Millions of copies of his books continue to be published, translated into dozens of languages, and discussed on the internet and in traditional media. Every year, new interpretations appear that relate the ancient quatrains to current events. The prophecy publishing industry generates millions of dollars, and the name Nostradamus has become a brand, synonymous with predicting the future. Numerous films and documentaries have been made, and thousands of books have been written. The house in Salon, where the astrologer lived and worked, has been turned into a museum that is visited by tens of thousands of tourists from all over the world every year. Nostradamus' cultural influence goes far beyond literal belief in his prophecies. He has become the archetypal image of the seer in Western culture, the benchmark for all subsequent fortune-tellers. When people talk about the modern Nostradamus, they are referring to someone capable of predicting the future. His name has become part of popular culture. It is mentioned in films, songs, novels, and video games. The series Civilization includes Nostradamus as one of the wonders of the world. The 2009 Hollywood film The Prophecy, although distorting historical facts, grossed over $80 million at the box office. This demonstrates the persistence of the myth of the medieval seer in the modern consciousness. Academic science refers to Nostradamus as a historical phenomenon that deserves to be studied not as a source of real prophecies, but as a cultural text. Researchers analyze his texts in the context of Renaissance literature, the history of astrology, and the social history of the 16th century. Important scientific works have appeared that consider the prophecies as a literary work and a historical document of their time. Nostradamus was a cultured Renaissance man, a physician, an expert on antiquity, and a witness to religious wars and epidemics. His texts reflect the worldview of the time, a mixture of Christian eschatology, Neoplatonism, astrology, and humanistic ideas. The philosophical significance of the Nostradamus phenomenon is related to the eternal questions about time, destiny, and free will. If the future is predetermined and can be predicted, does this mean that we are not free in our choices? Or do prophecies only describe probabilities that can be changed? Nostradamus himself wrote that his predictions are not absolute, that prayers and righteous actions can change destiny. This leaves room for human freedom and responsibility. The philosophical debate about determinism and indeterminism, initiated by the thinkers of antiquity, continues through the prism of prophecies. 20th-century quantum physics proved that, at the micro level, the future is indeed probabilistic and not predetermined, undermining classical determinism. Modern technologies create new forms of prophecies. Machine learning algorithms predict consumer behavior, financial markets, and even social unrest based on the analysis of large volumes of data. This is rational and scientific prediction, but it serves the same function as ancient prophecies. It provides information about the future, albeit probabilistic. The difference is that modern predictions are based on statistics and calculations, not mystical visions. But the psychological need remains the same. People want to know what the future holds. Perhaps Nostradamus was a kind of 16th-century algorithm that analyzed patterns in history and extrapolated them into the future. Only instead of computers, he used astrological tables and his own intuition. The question of Nostradamus's secret prophecies about the future of Europe remains open. Skeptics are right to point out the lack of evidence of a supernatural gift, but they cannot explain why texts from 500 years ago continue to resonate with millions of people. Perhaps the question is not whether Nostradamus really saw the future, but rather that he created a mirror in which each era sees its reflection. His ambiguous and enigmatic quatrains are a projective test, similar to Rorschach blots, in which we find what we are looking for. 21st century Europe, undergoing an identity crisis, migration challenges, economic difficulties, and geopolitical instability, seeks confirmation of its fears and hopes in ancient texts. And it finds them because Nostradamus wrote about eternal themes: war and peace, the rise and fall of empires, the sufferings and triumphs of humanity. These themes are always relevant, and in this sense, the prophet of Salon truly looked into the future, not with concrete details, but with an understanding of the unchanging nature of humanity.